Lots of Christian denominations celebrate the Lord's Supper, the memorial of Jesus' actions in the upper room, where he took bread and wine and he identified them as his body and his blood. But the Catholic Church is particularly unique insofar as she teaches that when the priest takes the bread and the wine of what we call the Eucharist, the Mass, the Lord's Supper, and says the words of consecration over them, "This is my body and this is my blood," we believe, and the Church teaches, that the bread and the wine of the Eucharist aren't just symbols of Jesus' body and blood, but that they actually become Jesus, his body, his blood, his soul, and his divinity. Where does the Catholic Church get this teaching from? Why is the Eucharist so central to our faith? Why did Vatican II refer to it as the source and the summit of the Christian life? And how can Catholics believe that the Eucharist is really the body and blood of Jesus? I mean, if that were true and we were eating the body and blood of Jesus, isn't that cannibalism? In this presentation, Jesus and the Jewish Roots of the Eucharist, I try to answer some of these questions by going back not just to the pages of the New Testament, but to the Old Testament, and try to see that the reason the first Christians, who were all Jewish Christians, came to believe so quickly and so universally in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist is that they saw the Lord's Supper, they saw the Eucharist through ancient Jewish eyes. They recognized that in the Eucharist, we find the fulfillment of certain passages, certain prophecies, and certain images from the Old Testament. In this presentation, we're going to look at three in particular. Number one, how the Eucharist is the new Passover, the Passover lamb, where you have to not just slaughter the lamb, sacrifice the lamb, but eat its flesh. Number two, we'll look at the Eucharist as the new manna from heaven, this new miraculous bread that comes down from heaven to give life to the whole world. And then third and finally, my favorite, we'll be looking at the Eucharist as the fulfillment of the Old Testament bread of the presence, this mysterious bread and wine that was placed, of all places, in the tabernacle of Moses that was kept on a holy table made of gold, and that was a symbol and a sign of the face and the presence of God. When we look at the Eucharist through these three images of the Passover, the manna, and the bread of the presence, we'll begin to see why it is that the Jewish roots of the Christian Eucharist help us to understand why in the Eucharist we're not just receiving a symbol of Christ, but we're receiving the person of Christ, his body, his blood, his soul, and his divinity. As I hope to show, the more Jewish we become in our understanding of the Christian faith, the more deeply we'll recognize why it is that the Catholic Church teaches that the Eucharist is the source and the summit of our lives.